First guest tonight is a very Welshman. Born in the Rhondda Valley, the son of a miner, he became a teacher, novelist, playwright and television personality in that order. To date, he's written 14 books, 3 plays, and is probably best remembered in television for his work on the Brains Trust, where he distinguished himself as a marvellous talker. Ladies and gentlemen, Gwyn Thomas. Making one of your rare visits to London, Gwyn, do you like coming up here?
No, the place is a kind of miasma to me. It's never really been a fact upon this earth. I've blown in and blown out, you know, and the panic I felt on my first visit many years ago is still as vivid as ever. They have an emergency signal at Paddington to say that I've jumped out of a panic, you know, and to sort of alert the boys. But no, it's... I would say the only moment when I really felt in real contact with London is when I broke my toe in Ealing. And this is a very, very strange thing. At that time, I was one of the lantern-swinging parts of the world's conscience, you know, a really flaring frontal lobe, and I was delivering socialist pamphlets to a block of luxury flats. The first time I'd ever seen this kind of housing in my life, you know, because in large parts of the Rhondda, they are still well tucked into the cave, housing-wise. And I went to the top floor of this flat, knocked on the door, and a man who must have been a retired colonel from at least 3 separate Indian armies came to the door, you know, 2 feet taller than I was. I looked down. What do you want? I said, well, I'm hoping to interest you in a new outlook upon the world. Pacifist, egalitarian. Would you care to look? Get out, he said. Get out. And he sort of bustled over me. And he had 2 boxer dogs at his side, and they looked exactly like he did. And if anything foxes me, it's having 3 living creatures looking identical in front of him. So I sort of hastened down this corridor, and he sort of got me in a sort of rugby grip, and he was undoubtedly going to dispatch me as he would have done one of his sort of Pathan porters up on the Khyber. And he hit me, and then he turned in imperial disdain, and I kicked him. And I broke my toe.
I was going to ask you why, in fact, you chose to live in Wales. It's quite obvious now, isn't it? They don't get to retired Indian colonels.
Yeah, I'm not living, I'm hiding.
You're in fact, you're living still in the same area where you were born, Gwyn. Why is that? Is that a need that the writer feels to be near his home, or what?
Very near. I think it's got a lot to do with the fact that my mother, and I, of course, I'm the youngest of 12 children, which is quite a load to bear, humanly speaking. Because I don't know how it is in other parts of the country or the world, but in Wales, if you were the youngest of a very large family, you were the chopping block for the lot. And, you know, all their frustrations in politics, love, ambition, they take it out on the youngest. And by the time I was 7, I had a book of bruises that could have been featured by the Sunday Times in their supplement, you know. It was really something. And my mother died when I was very young, and I think I had this feeling that there was some primeval security, the security of the womb, that I had rather missed, you see. And I have tended to stay near this valley where I was born, which is another way of saying that as soon as I get to Chepstow, I feel very frightened and turn back.
Yeah. But it's amazing, isn't it, that kind of background, the mining community, it wraps itself round a child, and an adult too, and does, in fact, have this kind of magnet pulling you back.
Yeah, it's because this is really one of the most entertaining parts of the world, you know. A finer set of comedians, liars, thinkers. Because really, you know, we've had many explosions in Wales, and I think the truth has been a casualty in virtually all of them. But this is great, and you know, living in this community that could produce the religious revivals that we had in the early years of this century. And even though I was born after the great wave of revivalism passed, I still lived in this kind of incandescent atmosphere because the explosions in this valley were so regular we could virtually keep the time, almost time an egg, you know, by listening for the sound of the next blast. Yeah. And my father very often told me about these revivals because he was a very sensitive man, a very responsive man, and he told me that he was revived 3 times in the course of one winter. But he said it was a very cold winter, of course, and fuel was scarce and dear, and to be revived was a cheap form of being blanketed from the world. Yeah. But he used to tell me a marvelous story. His job underground was looking after the horses, you see. And he used to talk to the horses. He used to recite entire speeches by Lloyd George to these horses. And they would respond in what I thought a very sensible way by kicking him. And time and again, he'd be brought home, looking like Spartacus, bruised and martyred. And always hoping, of course, that this would be his ticket out of the mines. And he really did get his ticket out of the mines very fast. He sort of founded the slump in 1921. And he used to tell me about this revival, this very great revival of 1904, when he was one of the men working underground. And you can imagine handling a horse in a lovely sunlit field could be hard enough. But handling a horse in this dark hell from which they never really emerged, you see. The men did occasionally, but the ponies hardly ever. And they lived in this state of fractious discontent. So the ostlers, the men who looked after them, perfected types of profanity that would surprise Mrs. Whitehouse if she could ever really listen in to the language of these men who handled horses underground. Then the revival came, and oddly enough, the men who responded most passionately to the appeal for purity were the ostlers, because they probably realized that they had gone further into hell on earth, you see, with their language, than any other, and they gave up swearing. And the horses couldn't understand what they were saying. No, this is quite true. This is quite true. For 6 months, they couldn't get a tap of work out of these ponies because they had got used to this lovely, fluent rush of obscenities. And without these, life lost its meaning.
That was your father, of course, down the pit. Now, I know that in Wales, like where I came from in Yorkshire, that the tradition there was that the son followed the dad down the mine, with very rare exception. How did you manage not to follow your father down the pit, Gwyn?
Well, this became a sort of religion, of course, that to go down into the pit was really to go down into the grave, socially. I mean, some of the lads, they really loved the idea of sort of following their mates down into the hole, earning money at 14 or 15 or whatever it was. And they used to wear, did you ever see this, Michael, the white ducks, the trousers they used to wear, these kind of virgin white? And this is one of the great things, to watch these lads going for the first time down into the pit with these marvelous trousers glowing in the pre-dawn dark. And, of course, the whiteness and virginity would go out of their lives almost as fast as it went out of their trousers. But I was a kind of gangster of the spirit, Words are, after all, weapons, and the weapons that we had to use to get out of this awful fate. So I became a very sedulous student at the age of about 9 or 10. But I still can't be anywhere without reading, In sort of toilets, I very often read 10-shilling notes when they... a few 10-shilling notes that remain. But this was it, really. It was this almost demented desire to isolate myself from this awful threat.
You said you took your refuge in books and became, I once read a marvellous phrase of yours, an academic gangster.
That's right, yeah. This is what it was, really. It was sort of... I didn't see this in terms of sort of being happier studying modern languages than doing anything else, but actually it was a carefully selected way of shooting back at a world that is shooting at me.
Right. But it occurs to me, I mean, you went to university. It would occur to me that you were deliberately, in fact, setting yourself up as a target. I mean, if you feel this way about your background, it's surely safer to stay where you are than to go into an alien world, which, in your case, university, I mean, was it an awful experience for you?
Not very pleasant, because, when a boy comes from a mining valley, this is a kind of Emlyn Williams thing, But actually, Emlyn was far luckier than I, because he came not from South Wales, which is a very separate territory, but from the north, where sensibilities are very different. But the effect of Oxford on me, the son of an unemployed miner. I mean, there were thousands of people at Oxford whose fathers were unemployed, but I was the only one whose father was officially unemployed. Who was on the books. And, instead of being surrounded by these dark, squat, passionate men who sort of frequent the valleys, who are the miners, suddenly to be surrounded by men who were sad with height, They were all sort of looking down on me. And I'm still neurotic up at the top of my head because of this. And, people who sort of lived in a sort of world that I could not have been more alien to. And you say that I set myself as a target. I did, and they all hit the mark, too, the people who wanted to shoot me.
But did it leave any kind of social hurt with you?
I don't think so, no. I mean, aren't we all sort of specialists in being hurt in some way or another? And I don't think that we'll ever start on the road to happiness until we frankly admit that we have been hurt in certain ways and not try to heal the hurt. That's impossible. But to live cozily with it, and laugh at it, because it's all absurd anyway. I mean, whether you're a prince who comes down or a miner's son who goes a little way up, it's all right.
Why is it, do you think, Gwyn, that the Welsh have this extraordinary facility for talking, which you're now demonstrating?
Well, that's a kind of wounding compliment, really.
No, it's not meant, it's not meant to be, I assure you. It's a glowing one.
But actually, I think it all stems from the fact that we lived in so crazy a society that we feared to hear what we might hear if we stopped talking. This is a kind of way of deafening ourselves against the environment,
You once said that every Welshman's a kind of mobile theatre. What exactly did you mean by that?
This is true. I mean, they have ways of telling you the time that make you think that they've invented the clock. It's 10 to 9. It's 10 to 9, Igor. It's 10 to 9. I'm a liar. It's 5 to 9, you see. And in the Rhondda Valley, this is a very strange thing. In the Rhondda Valley, I looked like thousands of other people. Slightly Semitic, slightly negroid, and dark and short, broad. And I must have looked like so many people that time and again, people have come up to me, in the street, tug my sleeve. Braun's pregnant. I didn't know who Braun was. No idea. Councillor Dawes is in it again. And so on, it's great, all these kind of things. And of course, this is very good for a playwright.
Yes.
Because I'm sure that they did create a kind of theatre around themselves,
Yes.
Because it was a very dramatic society.
Yes.
There's no doubt at all about it. Yeah. Strange things, the crimes that we had, always done so innocently that we agitated at one point for the county council to issue a handbook to potential murderers because every crime was solved so quickly. There was no tension at all. We thought it was silly.
What about the Welsh's gift for politics as well? One thinks of the extraordinary figures like Bevan, who came out of the valleys, out of your environment. What shapes them?
Yes, he was a very fascinating character. He was a man very much after my own heart. He was very aristocratic, and of course he was full of contempt, really, for the society that had begotten him. And all he wanted was to get rid of that society. You could always feel that whenever Bevan set his eyes on these awful, grey, scabrous streets, that they should never have been made. And yet, you see, one of the great things in Wales is that if you say this, you are accused immediately of spitting upon Aneurin Bevan's name. Aneurin Bevan would have crucified you if he could have heard you speaking about the lovely terraces of Ebble Vale like this, you see. And so on. They are a bit demented, but so charming.
Yeah. What about the Welsh thing about self-destruction as well? One always thinks of Dylan Thomas and the way that he went and other people like him. You knew Thomas, didn't you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Am I right in saying that there was a kind of self-destructive urge there? The booze and sort of thing?
Well, in so many ways, it's embarrassing to be a Welshman. It's embarrassing to be a poet, even more. I would say that being a poet must be so difficult that the poet is always hungering for the little door, the exit thing, And I seem to have spent a lot of my life, too, looking for exits all the time, which is the way out then, No, we have very little confidence in ourselves. We have a great gift of being malicious about our neighbors and very sad about ourselves. And I suppose we share this gift in common with the Eskimos, the Pygmies, and all the people in between. But actually, I do think that when a Welshman is given any kind of creative gift, that he becomes much more aware of tensions and dangers than most other people. Because, you see, he lives in a society that is fairly gifted. You see, every Welsh village contains at least 20 active bards, people who imagine that they're the greatest actors since Irving or Olivia. And, this gives you a kind of itchiness when you do something yourself. You are aware that all around you in the dark, you see the voices are going out, "There, he isn't a patch. He isn't a patch on Gestin Goron. Did you ever see him? Gwyn Thomas, what's he done? But compared with Ivor Jacobs. Have you ever read Ivor? And I've never heard of these people at all, you know, but this is the kind of attitude, and I think it keeps the artist very humble, which is good.
But have you ever had the urge for self-destruction yourself, Gwyn? Have you ever felt like drinking yourself to death?
Yeah, but I've never been able to afford the tools. I think that's very true, you know. Whenever the spirit has been absolutely willing, the purse has been utterly empty.
But what was the nearest you came to it? I mean, what was your problem? Was it booze or was it...
Well, cigarettes. I mean, I was the youngest of 8 brothers. They were all very heavy smokers, and by the time I was 8, I thought that this plume of smoke from the nose was a kind of Mendelian appendage, you know. And I felt really deprived. I knew I was being deprived by society in so many ways, you know, but I thought at least I can do this, so I stole their cigarettes until I was 11, when I could buy my own. And I was on about 10 Woodbines a day at the age of 10. And by the time I was 14, I had a nicotine stain up to here. And I was the greatest inhaler of my time. I was a good baritone, you know. I had good breath control. Whenever I inhaled, it was so intense an experience that I was the only man who, at 21, had cancer of the kneecaps. As a result of this.
Well, you've given up now, of course.
I have given it up.
Yeah.
And the kind of self-destruction thing again, you see. I gave it up in the summer when the first A-bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. And I was in such a state of cloudiness, you know, after all nicotine that I had absorbed, that I get the two events confused, really, now. And I gave it up by walking about the cemeteries of South Glamorgan for 6 weeks in one summer, reading the tombstones, reading them attentively, reading all these lovely stories of grief and love, and I'd cry and cry and cry, and for the first 3 weeks my tears were dark brown from the nicotine, and then when they became transparent at the end of the 6 weeks, a doctor declared me cured.
A likely story, but a very entertaining one. But I mentioned in the introduction that you worked on brain stress, of course, and I wonder what it must have been like for you as a very warm, passionate person in that sort of icy, intellectual crowd that you were with. Did you enjoy it?
In a frostbitten kind of way, yeah. No, it was very odd indeed, because these were the great mandarins, of course, you know, Lady Violet, who is now, unfortunately, dead. And about her one can speak freely, about the others in a more hedged way. But she was the most remarkable person, because I am the very personification of claustrophobia. You know, brought up in a small house, in a narrow valley. I've got all the neuroses connected with people who fear the roof coming down. And indeed, in the Rhondda Valley, that is very true, you know. We virtually ate like this with the left hand and keeping the right. And Lady Violet represented, of course, the very extreme of this. She was a lady who had lived in great spaces, you know, the most marvelous country houses of Britain, you know, surrounded by the most marvelous parklands. And she would look at me in the most peculiar way, as if, well, now, where did they find this creature? And I'm sure she must have rung up Peter Scott, you know, to ask from what part of the wildlife caper I had come, or from what part of Mars. Because, you know, and this feeling, well, I'll grit my teeth now, and possibly he'd go away. Yeah. Yeah. But it was a great experience, because these were, you know, a man like Bronowski, after all, is one of the intellectual marvels of the age. And he once made, I would say, one of the most daring statements ever made by a genius. He said, "One day, Thomas, I could even teach you mathematics."
You taught yourself, of course, Gwyn, for some time. Why did you give it up?
Well, I did a fair stint. Of course, Luther said that no man should teach for more than 10 years. And there were a lot of people in the Rhondda Valley would have said that no man should live for more than 10 years. You know, before the trouble really starts, you know, skip out. No, I liked it. I liked it in many ways. I taught only boys for most of my time. I taught for 2 wonderful years in a mixed school in Cardigan. And, you know, the company of these lovely young girls and boys, coupled with the fact that it was set in one of the most beautiful parts of Wales. And, of course, what really got me in that school was that when the academic going got really tough, when we were dealing with a verb, and after all, I was teaching French to children who thought in Welsh, and I was rather excitable in both languages, in 3 languages. And when the going really got tough, one of the lovely girls would raise her hand and say, "We are to report to Miss whatever now," and off they'd go, and they'd come back with offerings of jam tarts. And I think that this should be statutory in every school, that whenever the going becomes really difficult, somebody should bring in a plate of lovely jam tarts or cream puffs or something. And then a boys' school, of course. But even so, even with them, you had this marvelous sense of a great jest that is going on all the time, because there is something rather absurd, of course, about a domineering man with 30 captive children in a room, teaching things which are going to be totally irrelevant to them for most of their lives. But I must say that I achieved a very good compromise most of the time. I mean, I didn't want to teach and they didn't want to be taught. I think that's the only way to make sense of it.
You also, of course, you've written stage plays, 3 stage plays, as I said before, but you've acted as well, haven't you? You've had a little sort of experience treading the boards. I wonder what you particularly remembered about that.
I did some acting in school, in the 6th form, and I have a feeling that the man who produced the plays, this master, he was a very neurotic chap, who didn't like the Valley at all. He would have loved, to have taught somewhere in the Thames Valley and been at ease with the kind of pseudo-aristos and so on. And whenever he cast me, and I even then was a kind of aspiring Quasimodo for looks, but he always cast me as a lovely woman in these plays. And in one of these plays, I took the part of Moonbeam, the most beautiful woman in the harem. I was heavily made up, and I got into serious trouble with the rugby team. Virtually the whole of one season. Ruined their game.
Has it flavoured your attitude toward rugby players or rugby?
And to harems, yeah.
Did you ever fancy that? Were you ever attracted to the idea of being an actor, though? I mean, obviously the sort of creative talent you have had to come out one way or the other and came out as a writer, but did you ever have fantasies when you were a kid of being an actor?
I would say so, yes. Because there were the great lamps in our lives were to be an actor, to be a preacher, to be dominant, to be influential. Because after all, the alternative was pretty grim, going down into those pits. And I did have this feeling it would be marvelous to have been an old-time preacher with the wonderful acoustic they had in the chapels. I mean, this is a very great thing. Some years ago, I did a program, a kind of autobiographical program, in which I visited the chapel in which I had sat as a child. Not as a worshipper, because I was a theological virgin, because it was in Welsh and I couldn't understand the language. And I would suggest this is a superb training in religious doctrine, to be compelled to go to a church or chapel where you can't understand the language. And you can concentrate upon watching the preacher and watching the deacons and watching all the kind of love and malice and hatred simmering, on the faces of the parishioners. But, I sat there, and oddly enough, this has happened all through my life. I came into life, and there were great things around me, a great coal industry, a tremendous, roaring, passionate religion, and these things just went, And when I did this little bit of the program in this chapel, it had become a bingo hall. A bingo hall. I've never seen the thing had been stripped, but you could still sense the key to the mystery, the wonderful acoustic. You whispered and there was a roar, it was marvelous. And I thought, what a wonderful fate, to have been able in the days of total faith to mount that pulpit and play hell with them all. And there'd be no answer at all. You'd be a total, not orator, but a total anesthetic.
Gwyn Thomas, thank you very much indeed. Gwyn Thomas, of course, will be sticking around and joining us later in the programme to talk, after I've talked with Sarah Miles. Time now for...
Horses.
Yeah. You don't like horses very much, do you, Gwyn?
No, I've had enough trouble with human beings. I'd say I've spent about 1/10 of a second on a horse. Because they weren't lovely horses at this valley at all. They were these vast horses that pulled things. you know.
But they're useful. Are much better than these flimsy things
this
we get
particular
today.
horse pulled the rubbish cart. And the man who controlled the horse and the cart, sporadically, was one of the worst dipsomaniacs in the Gulch, you see. And he came along one day very, very drunk. And I was about 4. Have you been on a horse? He said. No. Would you like to be on a horse? Yes. And he lifted me up, and I went right over. I touched the saddle for one splinter of time and crashed down. And was concussed. And I was lying there, and he was so drunk that he picked me up and put me in the cart with the rubbish. Which has given me odd feelings about horses.
It's just the wrong way to start, really.
Yeah.
It certainly is, It's the wrong smell.
Often you go hunting and you never catch a fox. They're the best days. You have the gallop and the excitement, and there's no kill, and that's marvellous.
Why do you need a fox then in that case?
Well, you see, why do you need a fox?
Why can't you have a fella running along with a
Well,
rat?
Dudley Moore did it, didn't he? Dudley Moore did it, and Peter Cook chased him.
Yeah, you got caught.
But I say a good jailbreak would meet all these requirements. Excitement and so on. We have a hunt now in South Wales. You know, it's one of the most bizarre conjunctions of animal and man ever contrived. And they tell me that in the early days of the hunt, when it was extraordinarily disorganized, they used to meet in the pub, you know, and jug up. And the only time they ever got the fox is when one of the riders, was so drunk he fell off the horse and cussed the fox. Fell on the fox and got it that way.
That's the best I've ever heard.
The link between you two, of course, is that Robert, Gwyn Robert, is a writer and playwright. Do, in fact, Sarah, do writers make good husbands, do you think?
Well, I don't know, you see, because I've only been married to a writer. I mean, when I married somebody else, I'll come and talk to you about it. But, you see, I can't compare him, really. It's very difficult because we never really meet.
I was going to say it's a very lonely business, right?
It's a very lonely business. It's rather a large house, and we only meet at meals, and as he's on a diet, we don't meet at all. So then we don't believe in intimacy in our marriage. Once you let intimacy creep into marriage, I think it's had it, really. We just keep well apart, meet every now and then on the tennis court or on a horse, and just keep totally separate lives. And then I think it works.
I think a very happy marriage is a kind of cannibalism, because you literally do feed on each other. But if it works out, it's very happy. I tell you, it's the diet that I would recommend to anybody.
Well, I'll go home and try that.
Yeah.
But
Instant wife sirloin.
In what sense cannibalism, though, do you mean?
Well, you literally feed on
Well,
them.
of course, especially if there aren't children, which is the perfect marriage. I would say if you could eliminate children from marriage, it would be a pretty workable institution. But no, I think that if two people do have a great affinity, and they live without children, that they can be sublimely happy, but there is a curious mutilation that must go on.
Good heavens.
That is extraordinary, isn't it?
I mean mutilation in the kindest possible way. It is a great creative act.
Not mutilating people. I mean, cannibalism.
Cannibalism.
Yeah.
I would have thought that children were the cementing factor in many marriages, and that without children, the majority of marriages would be absolutely empty, would serve no purpose, no meaning, and why have it? Wouldn't you agree with that? I mean, is this an attitude you take?
I absolutely agree with everything you say.
You do?
I've cemented mine. It's really cemented my marriage now, and I don't regret the cement at all.
You couldn't have managed without it, without children? I mean, I've got a terrible feeling about this, of course, because I was the youngest of 12, which is an obscenity. And if humanity went along on that path for very long, of course, there'd be a cannibal mayor of every town. Because this would be forced upon us. That we simply couldn't live with this sort of philoprogenitive mania that we've had. I mean, every human being wanting to multiply himself 6 or more times.
You're rather talking of the last of 12.
Yeah.
Some people aren't, you see. I mean, 2 or 3.
The last of 6 twice, which makes me
6 twice.
twice as big.
I do think that 12 is a lot.
Well, of course.
Yes, I mean, that's a lot of cement.
It's a football team.
Yeah.
Sarah, can I talk to you about you going to Hollywood? Because you never went there, did you, until you got the Oscar nomination for Ryan's Daughter. Why, in fact, did you avoid it? Did you avoid it until then?
Yes, I did. I avoided going anywhere up until then. That's why my career was rather dodgy, because I wouldn't go anywhere because of my dog. I promised that I wouldn't, because I once went away and he nearly died, so I said, right, this dog means more to me than anything else, so until he dies, I won't leave England. So I kept to that. And he died about 2 months before I went, so I could go.
What were your impressions, though, when you went there? I mean, what was Hollywood? I mean, did it live up to what you anticipated? Was it worse? Was it better?
I don't know, I loved it, because everybody was so kind, and, oh Christ, I sound like everybody else. Doesn't that sound awful?
No, if it's true,
God.
it's not awful.
It was a bit sad, because you saw these beautiful homes empty, and all the sort of movie stars out of work living in the lodges at the bottom of the drive. To a standstill. They don't know what to do next. I mean, for instance, I went to one party and there were these huge custard pies. Well, you know, one was lemon and meringue pie and the other was banana split. And everybody ate the lemon meringue, nobody wanted the banana split, so I picked it up and thought, now, who is it worthy of to receive this pie? And I looked round the room, there was one sweet gentleman on the floor. I thought, well, he can receive this pie. So I threw it in his face, and it went all over Turkish carpet everywhere, and he was wearing specs. He behaved beautifully, he didn't complain or anything. He was a very nice young man. But the thing was that as I was leaving, I was told that everybody is now having custard pie parties.
Really?
It suddenly became in fashion, so you can see how bored everybody is if they can, in fact,
How
do
can a
this.
society of that sort go on at all?
I don't know.
Something as ludicrous in the context of the world situation. Well, Hollywood has always been a fairly Gorgonzola institution.
It's
Really, but that it goes on today utterly baffles me.
Well, it doesn't really. I mean, they're all pretending it is, and they're all struggling, but it isn't at all.
And it's not...
Well, this chap on the floor is probably the official pie receiver.
You didn't know what he was? He was Professor of Sociology at UCLA.
That doesn't surprise me at all.
But I mean, we shouldn't set too much store by the story, because I mean, Hollywood's representative of nothing on God's earth, is it? Except this curious little sort of colony where all these
That's right.
freaks.
It's not
But it's
bad
effect,
at all.
it's
Very
effect.
warm-hearted people, much
Oh,
nicer
lovely.
than we are.
You see, great as the Roman Empire might have been, Hollywood in its day, my word. At one time in the Rhondda Valley, there were 30 men in jail for trying to imitate Rudolph Valentino. And they just didn't have the rhythm.
The rhythm.
Who was your... you obviously used to go to the cinema a lot, didn't you, when you were
Yeah.
a kid? Because it was a great cinema
I used to
going
go in
time.
right at the beginning and then hide either in the toilet or behind curtains, if it was the Alcazar, with curtains. And time and again, as a quite young child, I would be there until about 11 o'clock at night and come out and see the hillside glowing with lamps, people looking for a lost child. Gwyn Thomas hasn't turned up at his home. He's probably dead. He's gone down one of the fissures in the mountainside. And then they'd see a very short searcher with a lamp. That'd be me, Instead of helping and look for myself. And that's the story of my life.
Did you? Sarah Miles, thank you very much indeed. Gwyn Thomas, thank you. That's all for this week. See you same time next week. Till then, bye-bye.